Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. You know, if we're in the middle of a recovery, why doesn't it feel more like a recovery? Our next guest may be able to shed some light on that with us. Ben Zipperer is a research economist at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. His research focuses on issues like the minimum wage, labor standards in general, measuring how specific labor market policies affect income distribution, productivity, and employment, and all of the related areas that affect people's livelihoods, for lack of a better summary. Ben Zipperer, first of all, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I was very interested in a piece you wrote recently entitled, "Where is the U.S. Labor Market Recovery for Prime Age Workers?" I think that's a question people are asking themselves. We're hearing good top-line economic numbers. We're hearing a lot of talk that the Federal Reserve should ease up because things are better, but a lot of people don't feel like things are better, do they?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's because I don't think that we really have great top-line economic numbers. For example, what you were talking about just a moment ago about the share of what's called the prime age working population. So these are folks who are ages 25 to 54, folks who we expect to pretty much have a job. There are some exceptions to that. For example, if somebody's raising a family, you might not want them to work. But these are kind of the prime working years. So you actually want to see a very healthy employment rate for those folks. And we don't really have that right now. Employment rates were much higher during the past couple of business cycles, and even though there's been some recovery here for the prime age employment rate, it's very inadequate. For example, the prime age employment rate today is lower than at the lowest point of the last business cycle. So during the depths of the prior recession, the recession of 2001, during those depths, the employment rate was actually higher than it is today, and we've had basically about 6 years now of constant employment growth. So this is really this is an indicator that suggests that we're very far from being recovered from the Great Recession.
So, and you know, by top line numbers, I guess I was referring to, first of all, the unemployment figures, the official unemployment rate, which looks pretty decent, and also the fact that you hear a lot of people in the political world, when you hear the gross numbers of labor force participation, say, well, it's all the baby boomers and they're all getting older, but this number, the prime age participation number, corrects for that, and it's basically telling us something different, isn't it? It's saying that a lot of people who we would expect to be working and at other periods of history would be working, if they're not in the unemployment figures, I guess that means they're not looking. And so does that mean discouraged workers? Explain why this number is so bad, but the official unemployment rate looks so good. Why the disparity?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, you're absolutely right that the unemployment rate is starting to approach something that suggests that we should be seeing a tighter labor market, with it being close to 5% right now. However, just like you were suggesting, the unemployment rate, the way that's calculated, is that it doesn't factor in folks who decide not to participate in the labor market, that decide that actually the labor market's bad enough that I'm not going to look for a job, for example. So these discouraged workers, or workers who remove themselves from the job searching process, they're not counted in the unemployment rate, which is why, for example, a lot of economists will look to the employment rate. Now, also what you were saying is that one of the problems with looking at the share of the population that's employed is that doesn't really account for demographic changes. And we have seen very big demographic changes over the last 15 years as the population ages. However, that's precisely what you were saying, why we focus on what's called the prime age employment rate. So like you were saying that the unemployment rate does show something positive, whereas the prime age employment rate shows a lagging recovery. Another top-line indicator that I feel like gets some attention, but maybe not enough attention, but is really what we're after, is that's wage growth. And just like the employment rate being relatively low, nominal wage growth is really not in a good position if we're going to consider this a healthy recovery.
Now, is that because normally, first of all, I guess I should say we're talking with economist Ben Zipperer. I guess first I should say there are people who I think for ideological or other reasons, politicians and maybe some economists too, who want the Fed to raise rates or have other reasons to minimize the problem. But in many cases, it's misunderstanding. I think when people think about wages not coming up, they think, well, it's because there's not enough competition for jobs. So with so many unemployed workers, employers don't have to pay more. But if those people are discouraged and they're not even out looking for work, why are they affecting the wages at all? Is it just because employers know that there are a lot of non-working people out there and they don't have to raise wages?
That's absolutely right. It's very easy relatively easy to fulfill a job now. You not only do you want in a very tight labor market, employers have to compete for workers, and so they either have to compete for workers from the pool of the unemployed or the non-employed, or they have to draw workers away from other jobs.
Right.
And because they don't have to do that now, they don't have to raise wages.
And so this, in effect, and you work for the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, which by its name alone suggests that you're concerned with issues of wealth inequality. And in a situation like that, I would imagine the inevitable result is if you don't have to pay higher wages to your workers in order to get workers, the owners of the company, I guess economists will call it, some might call them the rentier class, but the investors and owners can keep more for themselves, and that exacerbates inequality. Am I right?
That's absolutely correct. So, for example, nominal wage growth, kind of year over year, comparing wages today to wages a year ago, it's running a little bit above 2%. Okay, so that's what we have right now. In a healthy economy, you want to see nominal wage growth at least 3.5%, maybe 4%. Why is that? Well, so we have a kind of a long-run expectation. The Fed has a kind of a long-run expectation of what they want inflation to be. That's about 2%. Then we have a long-run expectation of what we think productivity is going to be. That's about 1.5%. So you add those two numbers together, you get at least 3.5%. So if wage growth is below that, what that means is that just exactly what you were saying, RJ, is that owners, rather than workers, are capturing a larger share of national income. So that's what we have right now, and that's why we should expect, if wage growth continues like this, that we should expect rising income inequality.
Now, and we're talking with economist Ben Zipperer. That could take the conversation in a couple different directions, but let's start with this one and see how we do. The first one is then, why is there any discussion of the Federal Reserve raising rates at this point? As I understand it, the Fed has a dual mandate from Congress, and one is to manage inflation rates and so on, but the other is to ensure that there is adequate employment. And if, in fact, we're seeing these bad job numbers and we're seeing wage insufficiency, why would that even be on the table now?
I think that's a great question. I mean, frankly, I think that there has been the U.S. political system has abandoned, in some sense, its commitment to full employment. And you see that both in terms of monetary policy, what the Federal Reserve is in charge of, and also in terms of fiscal policy, what, for example, Congress and the President have their ability to affect. And in both monetary and fiscal policy have not, in my view, been concentrated towards maximizing employment. Instead, there's a hesitance to, for example, have stimulus or to expand state and local and federal government spending. And there's also a hesitance on the Federal Reserve's part to keep interest rates low, even well into the future, and to pursue other expansionary monetary policy. And that's why I think that you see both in Congress and both in the Federal Reserve and along, especially a lot of commentators wanting interest rates to rise.
So, and that raises a couple of interesting questions as well, Ben Zipperer, one of which is, okay, we can say the problems with Congress and so on have to do with the what might be called political economy and the idea that contributors to campaigns and so on have interests that align with the ideologies of certain politicians who don't like to spend government money. That's okay. That's one area of discussion and debate. Maybe this is getting out of your areas of research, but the Federal Reserve is supposed to be apolitical, yet it's taking this stance as well. Would you suppose that's because there's so much of a presence of financial industry executives on its governing boards and so on, or is it just responding to a broader political climate? Is it all of the above, or we just don't know?
I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, the Federal Reserve is very responsive to financial interests, both in terms of its composition and the interests of the people that run it. That doesn't mean that they are completely antagonistic towards working population or aren't interested in maximizing employment, but that does color their policy or their policy interests somewhat, and that's because banks and the financial industry actually want very low inflation, and so they're going to be inclined to raising interest rates.
Right, and so I imagine if you're Janet Yellen, who's the chair of the Federal Reserve and seems to be a good, decent, intelligent person, that you're trying to balance all these internal and external forces. So what can the general community, the general population do? I mean, a lot of people are struggling as a result of wage insufficiency and inadequate growth. A lot of people are looking for jobs. What can people know? What would you, if you could just get a message to the general population, what should they know? What should they be asking for at town hall meetings with politicians or in emails to their elected representatives or whatever? What should people understand about this?
Well, it's very difficult to, and it would be irresponsible of me to give any personal advice. However, I think the lesson when you hear discussions about monetary policy, when you hear discussions about raising interest rates, what raising interest rates mean is that it's going to slow the economy. It's going to make it more expensive for employers to invest and to hire workers. It's going to make it more expensive, for example, for a consumer to purchase a car or a house. So what raising interest rates do is it slows the economy. So when folks are advocating for raising interest rates, what they think is that the economic recovery is too robust, that people are making too much money, and that too many people have jobs, and we should, maybe not now, but in the future, they think that we're on a path towards overheating the economy. And I think it's very important to make that clear that raising interest rates will slow the economy. At the same time, when you're looking at employment rates for prime-age individuals, or if you're looking at wage growth for both overall workforce and also for production and non-supervisory workers, that both those indicators, which are probably the most important indicators to working Americans, both of those point in the opposite direction, that we should not be raising interest rates.
Well, that was exactly the answer I was looking for. And just to be clear, I was not asking you to offer personal advice like Jim Cramer or one of those. I like to, if I would like to think of myself as the anti-Jim Cramer. But at any rate, thank you for that answer. Thank you for your good work in this area. Ben Zipperer is research economist with the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. And Ben, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks a lot for having me on.